the Kuntres U'Maayan is written by the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. He's explaining here the idea, he explained various levels of tainugim, of pleasures. Number one, the tainug bahami, which is the lowest, the animalistic pleasure. Number two, the pleasure of music. Number three, the pleasure of doing someone a favor. And it's in that third pleasure that we're discussing now. And he said that if you do the pleasure because it gives you a high and it makes you feel better and all of that, it's similar to then a tainug bahami, the first type of tainug, which is the lowest type of pleasure, because it's all about yourself. So let's continue now in 37, second paragraph.
Moshe, can you send the text? Moshe.
I don't see him on. I don't see him on.
He's not. Okay.
Send him a WhatsApp, a private WhatsApp.
Okay.
Everything that was created in the world was created for a tachlis. So here the Rebbe is going to talk about this idea of one domain, one species giving of itself to a higher species, submitting to a higher species. And that's its tachlis, its purpose. Tachlis called the purpose of each species is to ascend to the higher realm above it. Take, for example, the ultimate purpose of the vegetation. It's when it's incorporated in the living kingdom, the animal kingdom. The tachlis achai. What's the ultimate of chai? It is it's when it incorporates itself in the higher kingdom species, which is the speaking, the human species. The tachlis hamedaber. So what's the ultimate purpose of the medaber's elevation? It's when his spirit ascends heavenly upward, and the human being allows himself to submit in spirituality that's above and beyond his realm. Because even though he is medaber, he is the human species, which is the ultimate and the highest of the four species, nevertheless, it's within humanity. He has to leave humanity. What do we call that in this instance? Ruchnius. Says the Rebbe, for example, when he learns Torah, he learns the Eibishter's will and wisdom, and Hashem and his Torah are all one. So when a person learns Torah, and he delves deeply into it, not a cursory learning, but iyun. We call this iyun. To understand these ideas that he's learning well and truthfully, not that he wants to tell the Torah what's the pshat, what's the meaning. Rather, he seeks to understand the meaning of the Torah as the Torah meant it to be. He then binds himself, unites himself with Hashem's will and wisdom, with an essential yichud, a very powerful unity. And the Rebbe Rashab sends us to, of course, Tanya Pedekei. As it says, in the book of the intermediates, Chelek Aleph, section 1, Pedekei, chapter 5. And with this submission to what's higher than man, i.e. to Ruchnius, man's soul is Tisala, has an aliyah, an elevation. It binds itself and it incorporates itself in Hashem's wisdom. Whether it be when he studies the Talmud, the revealed part of Torah, for example, Talmud, which is in its essence God's will and wisdom. Why? Hashem said when you punch someone in the lip and you make a damage, so and so is the halacha. Guess what? That is Hashem's will. Whoever has their please turn your mute off quickly. It's making a lot of noise. Shazeu kosher. Yes?
Rabbi Delphi, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you I came in, I missed exactly where we are. I'm sorry.
Page 37.
Okay, I don't have with me the regular sefer. I'm using the old one. So, are we still in the first mimer?
We're still in the first mimer in Perek Gimel of the first mimer, in middle of the page. That's all I can say.
Got it.
Okay.
I got it. Thank you.
What page is that? 64 in the old one?
Yeah, 64.
Okay, thanks, man.
Okay. So he says, when a medaber, when the living species, the species of the human elevates themselves by submitting themselves to Torah, and Torah is ruchnius, so he receives an aliyah because he's now left the plateau, the arena of humanity, and he's gone into the arena of spirituality. And he says that this is not only true with learning Chassidus and Kabbalah and Pnimius. He says this is also true when you learn Nigla. And why? Because when you learn any part of Torah, this means that this is Hashem's will. And whatever the halacha says is the halacha, that's actually God's will. So you're connecting with God even in matters that are very physical and very tangible. Shezeh kosher v'zeh posel. That the halacha says this is kosher and this is not kosher, it's posel, it's invalid. More so, whatever any future student in the future will come up with a novelty in Torah, hakol nemar, it has all been said, L'Moshe Sinai, top of 39, to Moshe on Har Sinai. So in other words, even an idea that you come up with in 2020, Tafshin Pei Aleph, that seemingly no one has come up with until now, that thought is part of Hashem's Chochmosai v'Ritzono Yisbarach, Hashem's will and wisdom. And therefore it's holy. This also includes all laws of Torah, of the oral Torah, and all the explanations associated with the oral Torah. It's all part of God's wisdom, mamish. So when a yid delves into these halachas, he is bound and united and incorporated in the essence of God, as we said earlier. So this is true for Nigla the Torah. Now the Rebbe says, so too, when a person learns the inner dimension of Torah, which we call Pnimius HaTorah, this refers to knowing and comprehending godliness, all that our sages of blessed memory reveal to us, all of these sages and rabbis and scholars of Torah, of Pnimis HaTorah, that they reveal to us the inner dimension of Torah, this is all part of the Torah, the essence of God, and Hashem is one with that. So he says, and when this yid in his little room learns Pnimis HaTorah, he binds himself with the inner dimension of God's wisdom, that's way above of the external part of Hashem. Both are part of Hashem. One's the chitzonius and one's the pnimius. The nigla is the chitzonius, and the pnimius is and chassidus, Kabbalah, and all that is pnimius. So that's one advantage that we have when we learn pnimius HaTorah. The Rebbe says another advantage. ויש מיילה נוספת בידיעס זויס דפנימיס התורה בפעולוסה בנפש. Now he says, not only does this learning of Pnimius HaTorah put you into the mindset of God's eye in a sense, but it also has an impact on your soul, on our soul. Let's see how. You know, when we learn about Spheros and Chitzonius and Pnimius and levels and soul, let's not kid ourselves. Do we really know the essence? Do we really know? When you take an esrog, you have an esrog in your hand, and you look at the esrog. Does it have a blemish here? Does it have a nice gidul growth? In other words, it's not just that I understand the laws of an esrog. I actually have the esrog. I have the essence. When you learn about Pnimius, when you learn about Hashem's Spheros, what do you have? You have bupkis. I mean, you don't have it. In a way, you have everything, but as far as the physical, tangible, you don't. So what do we have? We have the Yedias HaMetziut, it's called. The knowledge of its existence as an idea. The famous word is of the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidim, that they said that when Mashiach will come, we will pronounce all together, aha! Aha! What's aha? So the Tzemach Tzedek Chassidim said, we learned Chassidus by our Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek. We learned Chassidus during his time. And we were flying in concepts and ideas, but we had no real understanding of what this is because it's Ruchnius. When Mashiach will come, all of that will become apparent. And we will say, aha, this is what the Rebbe meant when he said this level of Ak, or this level of Pnimius HaKeser. Aha, now I know what the Rebbe meant. So they would say that Mashiach comes to give us the aha. So I say the same thing here because the Rebbe says here, Im hayois, although Im hayois shezuhi yedias metzias bilvad, till Mashiach comes, now Moshe, we are what? Learning we only have the external knowledge that such a thing exists. Now, let's continue. Nevertheless, but what is the content of his Yedias HaMetzias when he learns Pnimius, Ruchnius? We're not learning about an esrog. We're learning about, let's say, esrog is a pasuk in Tilim Al Tivienu Lidei Gaiva. It's brought down, right? So you know that when you have an esrog, there's a concept of gaiva. Now, gaiva is also gashmius, and you also know that Hashem is ultimately the ultimate of humility. So you understand the metzius of the ruchnius. You don't have the mahus of the ruchnius, the essence of the spirituality. You have the externality of spirituality, which we call metzius ruchnius. And shenirkavish benafshay. That, Yoni, can be felt in your neshama, in your soul. And therefore, when we have that experience, you bind yourself, you tie yourself, you connect yourself to that. You say, what does that do to you, to the person? It takes you out, it schleps you out, you say, from your materiality, from your geshem. And you ascend heavenly in a way, in a sense, to the level, to the madrega of refinement and spirituality. In other words, you become more of a spiritual being. You no longer look at the chont and the kishke and the kugel on Shabbos as just potatoes and meat and a geschmacke and eichel. But you mamish see it as a ruchnistic experience without or with saying Yoni L'Shem Kedusha Shabbos, as we discussed last week. Right? It's not just a lip service, it's an essence. Why am I eating this? Because it's Shabbos Kodesh. And therefore, Oh, you want to have something hot because the Shulchan Aruch says you should have something hot, and you're chamin they come out to be chont or whatever. I got some meiser. Okay, so you have a little chont, but you eat it because it's a ruchdishdike zach, not because it's gashmias. If you eat it, Avi, because it's gashmias, you're eating chont, and you might get a stomach ache and issues. But if you eat it beruchnis, you're not going to eat a lot. You're going to eat a little, and you're going to eat it carefully, and you're going to think about what you're eating. So the eating becomes a ruchnisdike eating. Let's continue. Whether this experience is felt and experienced in your own nefesh, in your own soul, and so too, b'chol inyonav ufrati as Yosef, in all of one's details and in one's behavior and actions, hakol hu b'bchinas hadakus, everything is transformed into edelkeit. Dakus means edelkeit, refinement. V'haruchnius bilti nitfas begeshem. It's such a spiritual experience that cannot be grasped in the physical. It's bereft of feeling, I'm doing the mitzvah, and I'm learning, and I'm giving the tzedakah, and I'm helping, and all that. It's bereft of that. It strips that because it's spiritual, and if it's really spiritual and holy, it removes the sensation that it's all about myself. It says in Yiddish, as itlechezach, that each thing, was tut, that he does, heim belimadat Torah, whether it be in the story of Torah, the heim, basic mitzvahs, whether it be doing mitzvahs, the anfein and their offspring, is dus edel. You do it edel. Very beautiful Yiddish word. Edel, to be edel, refined. Nit grob be'etzem, not to be grob, coarse, in essence, that everything you go about, you do it in a grub way. Unit murgish, and in the Hebrew, and not to be felt. Murgish means the emotional, the self is felt in everything that you do. And on blitis is a Hebrew word, but it means to, without standing out and protruding. No one has to know that I'm doing it, I'm behind it. Don't put your eye into everything.
That's what we say for. That's what they say for an esrog, blitas, bumps.
Yes, right, correct. And without holding, considering good. Oh, hachazokas teva. I'm favorable and I'm behind it. I did the good thing. La'atzeh for himself. Next page. Surely, this is all about not allowing the self to be in what's being done for yourself. Needless to say, koshkein, it shouldn't be recognizable fadem anderen, that the other person shouldn't recognize and see in what's being done that it's all you, that he did it, And the other person will say that he's doing it b'shvil azulas. Now, really, he wouldn't do it. But you know why he's doing it? Because of someone else. The Rebbe says, even if that's true, it should not be felt in the activity that you do. Because that too is feeling of the self. Then the Rebbe says, this is all what we've said until now is about doing something on the spiritual side, he says, when it comes to Gashmias, I've been talking about it in the Gashmias sense, so I jumped the gun. He was talking about it first more in the Ruchnias sense. Now he comes to, and when it comes to Gashmias, moving, b'mikoshkein, it's understood for sure, she'nifshat migashmiyusai, that the person strips the activity from its coarse Gashmish, she'eina misave inyonim hagashmim klal uklal, that he doesn't desire the Gashmish. So this is the mashal I gave you with the chont. You know what I mean? He doesn't want the food because it's the food and it tastes good and all that. Ve'eina chafetz behem, and he doesn't desire that. Kiyim kol cheftzei ritzoino, his entire desire and will, who belikus is the godliness. Kitzer, let's learn the kitzer. Ha'adam shu bal nefesh maskelis velikis. Man who is a man driven by an intellectual soul. We call it nefesh maskelis. And a yid has an additional soul, which is the ikar, of course, which is elokis, godly soul. Tzorich lisanik b'chochmas haTorah, needs to ultimately find pleasure in the wisdom of Torah. Could you imagine? The same wisdom we have from sleeping when we're tired, the same pleasure we have from sleeping, we should get from Torah learning and even more. And he explains why. Because tachlis kol nivra, lalos lemayla mimenu. The purpose of every creature is to ascend to a realm, to a species, to an experience that's greater than its own. By learning the nigla, the revealed part of Torah, you're actually united with Hashem's chokhmah, His wisdom and His will. And when you learn Chassidus, you're bound to the inner dimension of Torah. I want to point out to you something that's important. You see the Kitzer? Did we learn at all? A Kitzer means a synopsis of the previous paragraph. Did we learn the word Chassidus? Did we come across the word Chassidus in the previous paragraph? No. The Rebbe used the word Shmuel Pnimius HaTorah. And this is why the Kitzer of the Rabbeim is not just a repeat and a waste of time. In the Kitzer, many times, you will find a new word, a new idea that was not in the paragraph, or even if it was the idea, but it wasn't said that way. And here's a clear example. We did not learn the word Eisek HaChasidus in the paragraph. Are you with me? Are you with me? Right? I don't have, you have different pages, but before we learned the word Pnimius HaTorah, he didn't mention Chassidus. And that's why when I translated, I said Chassidus and Kabbalah, because Pnimius HaTorah refers to Kabbalah too. Here, he doesn't say Kabbalah, he says Chassidus. Now, the explanation is because not that Chassidus is Kabbalah, that's a big mistake. As the Rebbe wrote a whole essay on it called On the Essence of Chassidus. If you care to follow up, in the middle the Rebbe explains the difference between Kabbalah and Chassidus. Excellent explanation, excellent translation by Dr. Susan Handelman and Rabbi Herschel Greenberg of Buffalo. Excellent translation in English. But over there, the Rebbe explains the difference. Basically, one is going up, one is going down, and I don't want to take any more time on that right now. So, but here the Rebbe says, I'm talking about Chassidus. I'm not talking about Kabbalah. Because to really understand Kabbalah, you need Chassidus. Otherwise, it's mumbo, jumbo. And even if it's not mumbo, jumbo, and you understand, but nevertheless, it's a learning that does not work in a way of the moshel and the nimshul in the nefesh. Okay, the whole idea of a moshel and nimshul in the nefesh is a style of Toros and Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, and Chabad in particular. Then there's another thing that Rebbe says here that I want you to pick up on. Here he says clearly, how do you become more edel? How do you become more refined? By learning more Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, you don't necessarily become more refined. You know more about an esrog and about chont, but you don't become more refined. You want to become more refined, he says here, it's through learning Chassidus. Why? Because learning Chassidus is miskasher b'pnimiyusam. In order to become more refined, the pnimius, the inner aspect of man, needs to be refined. That comes through limit achsidus. And it doesn't come just by saying words. It doesn't come just by understanding the text. It becomes by experiencing, that's what he said earlier in the paragraph, delving deeply into. And this answers a very important question. People ask, why should I learn chassidus? Why should I learn chassidus? I need to know how to bench a lulav and esrog, how to put up a sukkah, how to clean for Pesach, how to write a marriage contract, etc. What do I need to know about the spheros? What do I need to know about what the spheros mean in my nefesh? And the answer is, if you want to approach the kiddushin and the sukkah and the Pesach and Shabbos, if you learn chassidus, it adles you, it refines you. And when it refines you, your appreciation of the mitzvahs is so much greater. I'll give you an example. Someone that Shmuel and I know in Los Angeles may be well. He's already Knei Nahara Ben Tishim, over 90. Reb David Mishulovin. And this Yid, Reb David, he came from Russia, from the Mishulovin, Chabad Mishulovin family. I think they have in Beitar, one of the nephews is a Rosh Hashiva there. and this Reb David, I was close to him. I used to want to listen to him, and I did listen, and he told me many stories, and because he was a person from the past, and he brought so much of Lubavitch to us, those that were willing to hear. So I remember this like yesterday. It was the middle of Sfiras HaOmer, and we were davening in Yeshiva Oral Chana Chabad. I was one of the older Bachar, the Shluchim there, and it was a middle of a Tuesday, a Wednesday, whatever. It was a regular Ma'ariv, nothing more than a regular Ma'ariv. I happened to be davening near where Reb David was davening. And then it was time to say the bracha on Sfiras Omer. So the Chazan says the bracha, and then everyone else says the bracha. And I hear with my ear the way he says the bracha, and I just turned around, because it was so awesome, and I just saw a man turn red and say the bracha and go on. And I remember now, and what did I see? Here it is, the middle of the week. It's not Rosh Hashanah, it's not Yom Kippur, it's not some special day. And he's saying a regular bracha where he turns like a red beet because he's talking to Hashem. That comes from Pnimius. You do not get that from just learning more and more Gemara. And let me say this. I want to clarify, because people listen to the shiurim and they have questions. I'm not saying it can't be from learning Gemara, but in today's day and age, unless you learn the Gemara with a Pnimius, and Pnimius doesn't mean shaking and baking and making with your hands and closing your eyes. It doesn't mean that. I'm not saying it can't be that, but that's still no proof that there's Pnimius there. I always say, and I've told you, the Rebbe davened like a regular one of us. If you saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe daven, or look at a video when he stands Shmon Esrei, he barely is moving like this, so quiet, so soft. And I promise you that he was so medubik, so attached to Hashem during Shmon Esrei, but yet it was without commotion, totally focused. So, I'm not, again, could it be that someone makes a lot of commotion and with their hands and their body and their mouth, and they clap and they dance, whatever they do, that they don't have a dveikus? I'm not saying it can't be, but it's not, to me and to the training that I got in Chabad, it's no proof at all yet. Because the Pnimius is a very different measurement. It's a very different category. And the Rebbe says here, I'm just elaborating for a minute for you all to see, that the Rebbe says clearly, the Rashab, Vayidei Eisik HaChsidis, Miskashe B'Pnimi Yusam, Unevert Edel B'chol Inyonim. I'm not sure if this, maybe the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote the Kitzer, not the Rashab, the son. But whoever wrote it, one of the two Rebbes, makes no difference. They say clearly, through the study and the learning, and ASIC, ASIC, Avi, is not just learning. ASIC is a business. A business person is totally immersed Day and night. He's always thinking about how to develop his business, make it better, it's more successful. Asik Hasidus. That he's not just studying Hasidus. He's living with it. He's thinking about it. It's in his DNA. Through that, he's miskasher in the Bipnimius, and unervert edel b'chol inyanim, and he becomes edel. And that's the answer. When you know someone who you grew up with, or you saw, and all of a sudden you didn't see him for a long time, and then you see the way he behaves and the way he is, and you say, "What's the Geshenda? What happened over here? We ate from the same plate. We played the same football. We went to the same movies, and you're here and I'm here." And the answer is, could be, that he learned Chassidus. And if he learned Chassidus, he turned into a different person. And if you're going to ask me, Chevra, we see so many people, and many times ourselves, we learn Chassidus, and we're not that way. So you know the famous answer is, you have to learn more Chassidus. Right? 3 things. If you drink alcohol and you're not shikker yet, you need to drink more if you want to get shikker, right? It's proof you haven't drank enough. And then the other thing is, I forget what's the other one. Does anyone remember? There's 3 things.
Giving tzedakah, maybe?
Yeah, giving tzedakah means, you know, if you haven't been moved by that, you have to give more tzedakah. And
no, it means money.
Money.
Give more money. Have more money, get more sugar.
More sugar, right. If you have the more and more money, you get more nechasim, like it says in Pirkei Avos, right? And so the Chassidus too. So the answer is not to stop learning Chassidus. I had, when I was in California, in Shlichus in Marin County, I would learn a period once a week with a doctor. He was a pediatrician at Kaiser, at the hospital. And he was from Boston. He had a good head, and he was very able. He came for his parents' ancestors came from Russia. I mean, he was a very and I really enjoyed learning with him. You know, I'm teaching in Tanya the first. So he come after chapter 12 in Tanya when we learned about the Beinani. The next week he doesn't show up to the shir. Well, I don't say anything. You know, something. The week after, again he's not at the shir. So I call him up and I say, "My dear Chaver, what happened? I miss learning with you." He says, "Rabbi, I'll tell you. When we learned about the Beinani, and I understand what this Beinani is, and I know I'm so far from being a Beinani, I don't see the purpose of learning this." So of course I told him, we need to learn more. You'll see how it applies to you. And as Shmuel once called me about, to make a Beinani society, you know, which the idea is a good idea. The idea, in idea is a good idea for sure. That the Alter Rebbe, no question about it, the Balatanya wants that a Yid should strive to be a Beinani. That's what the Tanya is about. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying and they're fooling you, okay? The objective is to become a refined person in thought, speech, and action. No question about it. How to implement that? We need to learn Tanya. The Alter Rebbe, if that's his philosophy and ideology and his thesis, study it, read it, understand it, kochzich in it, question, debate. So, a person, on one hand, should a person seek, like, I have today 2 Beinani points. No, because in Lubavitch, in particular, that's very, it's very, I'm not going to, from the Chabad perspective, it's a gross perspective. It's grub. 2 points, 3 points, 4 points. No. But, sometimes a person needs that. Okay? Sometimes what motivates a person is a point system, just like with a child. And the Rambam says, you begin with Shalei Lishma, you come Lishma, right? So you give it first candies, and then toys, and then honor, and then pleasure, right? So let's not kid ourselves. Many times we thrive better on a system of points. The whole Daf HaYomi, I'm not going to go into it now, right? But Daf HaYomi is the same thing, and Baruch Hashem, thousands, maybe millions, I don't know, people are learning Daf HaYomi. But in Europe, pre-Daf HaYomi, and in certain communities like Lubavitch, Satmar, other communities, it wasn't a big deal. I remember my father would go every night to learn Gemara with Rabbi Yisrael Friedman Malav Sholem in a shtibel in Crown Heights, and I sat sometimes there, and he taught them deeply the Gemara. They weren't following Daf HaYomi, they were mamish learning Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, deep and discussing, But most people, they want to feel they've accomplished something. I want a degree. I want a piece of paper. I've been called an EMT. We had a girl come here. We said Mazel Tov to her Thursday. She got her degree as an EMT. She feels like $1 million. Right? Now, of course, you need to have today degrees to be an accountant and a lawyer and a doctor and an EMT and a rabbi, smicha. We know that. And like I told you, it used to be in Lubavitch, the Bochurim shied away from getting smicha. My father-in-law, who could learn very well, he didn't get smicha because his mindset from Russia, he came from Russia, was smicha, I don't want to learn because of a title, and they didn't learn. So they might have even learned Yeredeya and knew Yeredeya without the title. Came the Rebbe in the 1950s and said, here in America, we need to get smicha. And the Rebbe had a far vision. He saw that without that smicha, even though the guy in Russia without the smicha could learn better than the guy in New York or in California or in America that had smicha, nevertheless, that feeling of accomplishment and with that piece of paper and that title will, in today's world, give them an entree to certain positions. And so it was. And it'll make them feel good, and they'll want to learn more. So on one hand, why am I saying this? Because on one hand, this idea of becoming edler, more refined, is you do it not because of Daf HaYomi, not because of smicha, not because of any. You do it because it's the Eibush Torah. Hashem says, "Learn Torah." Here I am, learn the Torah. But the fact is that there's a world around us that is not edel, that is grub, and that those things do mean something. So the Rebbe and others said, okay. And that was the whole argument with the Art Scroll Gemaras and the Steinsaltz Gemaras. I mean, you can't imagine, or maybe you could imagine, the antagonism by the Gedolim and maybe some Rebbes to translating and putting the Gemara in written form with nekudos and commentary and in English and in Hebrew. The argument was, you're watering down the Torah. How will a boy, a student, appreciate learning a piece of Gemara and haraving? Haraving is the term used in the yeshiva world. Effort and diligence. I remember when I'm from the pre-Art Scroll world. I learned Gemara beginning in the 70s. And I remember schwitzing to understand how to read a piece of Gemara and a Rashi, and a Tosfos, of course, and to understand the difference between Rashi and Tosfos in the Gemara. I remember the days when the Yonason and Teferis, I remember the way the boys had pencils and they used to write the Rebbe Sichas and translating Yiddish based on Fitzi, Lipsker, Rebbe Lipsker, Olav Sholem, and others gave the Shiurim, and they schwitzed to learn a little Yiddish. I remember that. Nothing was... Okay, all of a sudden we've gone into an age where it's much easier with the new Gemaras and translations, and now with the internet. So what should we do? Should we say it's forbidden? No. Gewaldig. And there's so much more Torah being learned and understood now. And today you have people, and you know some of these people, because you've seen them and read their works, where they're writing Torah based on the Art Scroll Gemara or the translation of Overcoming Folly. In other words, if you take away the Nekudis from them, they wouldn't be able to read it or understand it properly. Who cares? The main thing is to learn. So when you learn Chassidus, Validei Eisik HaChassidus, when you're involved and immersed in the learning of Chassidus, your nefesh, your nefesh has to become more edel. That's what I started with. And if you say, I'm not edel yet, first of all, self-discrimination is not, deprecation is no good. Number two, you can't be your own judge. Ask someone else, because you're subjective. Ask another party. And finally, if you feel that you learned Chassidus and you're still grub, learn more Chassidus and more Chassidus. And by Mashpia Maristan, Rabbi Tzvibel Rabbi Melech Tzvibel, when I presented such an issue to him as a teenager, who has the issues that teenagers have and the questions and the issues, he said to me, imagine what you would be, how much more grub and coarse you would be if you didn't learn Chassidus. And sometimes that's a calculation too. So the previous Rebbe writes in a Maimer 1948, Vayachlim, Parshas Vayishlach, I believe, he writes over there that when it comes to averting and avoiding sin, Aveira, do whatever it takes to get out. Even if you use gaiva to get out, by saying, hey, look, I come from such a family, I come from such a community, I know, imagine if people know that I do this, they wouldn't want to associate themselves, it's not good for my name, my family name, or, of course, it's not good for shidduchim. I want to give you an example. We have a neighbor here who said to us that she really wouldn't have themselves tested for COVID, but she'll do it because if it's going to mean that her kids won't be able to go into school, she'll do it. So people, and the same is with vaccinations. I mean, you know what I'm saying, that whole argument. Now, the truth is, you should do it if it needs to be done because it needs to be done. But that's not the way most people are in a daily way. They, the chitzonius, the external, the superficial, makes an impact on the pnimius. Here we're learning, when we learn Chassidus, and we're learning Chassidus, we're learning as Asik pnimius. Learn more pnimius HaTorah. I'm telling you, the Rebbe says, when you learn more pnimius HaTorah, you become more edel. Any questions, comments? Okay, if not, so everyone should have a great Chodesh, and tomorrow we will learn the same time, same place, and we'll go into the next chapter. Sei gesund. Good Chodesh.